Elder Greg's selection of a verse this morning is quite powerful. When I read it, I realized that this one verse sums up our entire job as followers of Jesus. I'll be reading from the New King James Version. The book is Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven.
Morning, church. You know, those of us who aren't pastors, we sort of wonder how we're going to present the message. And I knew what I wanted to present, but generally you like to have a warmer, something to get people started. And I couldn't come up with it. You know, those of us who aren't pastors have to work 40 hours a week. So it's hard to come up and get all these extra illustrations. But it came to me last week in Kirk's children's story. I don't know if you all remember that, but the adults listened to those too. And the light bulb went off. I was up front. You may have seen the light bulb go off in my mind. He said, "What is in a name?" And he went through the names last week. So as we start today, I want to introduce you to Marvin Medley. Now you see two of those people up there and you say, well, I know them, so by definition, I know who Marvin must be. Well, don't get so far ahead. The guy to your left, I'm looking at it up here, so I'll make sure that we're looking at the same side. The guy on the far left is my dad. That's Marvin Lewis Medley. You know the guy in the center is Jeffrey. Marvin Jeffrey Medley. And the big guy there on the end, the ugly one in the picture, is Marvin Gregory Medley. So we're all different in the fact that we go by our middle names, but we're all connected because we do have the same name. I'm sure that Jeffrey is glad he was a boy, or he might have been named Marvina, or something to carry on the tradition. But names are important. And my parents taught me that family is important and we should do all that we can for our families. Amen. Next to Jesus, it's the best thing we have on this earth. My dad showed that for numerous years, probably 20 years in my lifetime, he worked 80 to 90 hours a week to provide for his family. Many nights, my mom and I we stay up late in the family. I would still be up when my dad got up at 1:30 in the morning to start his day. And he would get home about 8 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. Never complained about it because that was his lot in life. When he was a kid, he was the smallest kid, or the youngest, of 5 kids. And his older siblings had moved out of the house, or they were more interested in their lives. And my grandmother never remarried. So my dad knew that he needed to help out in the family. As a kid, he grew up in Cabbagetown, downtown Atlanta. He went and made a wagon, and he would go to the grocery store and take people's groceries home for a tip. Back in the Depression, money was hard to come by. When he got home, he would give that money to his mom and help her support the family. he showed that again when he went into the Army. He said, the Army is going to take care of me, so why do I need a paycheck? They're going to provide my meals, my clothes. So he had his check sent home to his mom so she could survive. One day he walked up to his sergeant and he said, I got to go home. This Army, I'm quitting. Well, he was drafted. You don't have a choice. The sergeant said, well, you don't really have a choice in that matter. And my dad said, well, those checks aren't getting to my mom. I need to go home and take care of her. The sergeant said, go back to your quarters. I'll take care of it. And he did. Now, we're not here today for a story hour about my dad. It's just a starter. He was just like the rest of us. He was a good man, but he was a sinner in need of a Savior. And I was over 50 years old when my dad passed away. And there are things in life that you know, it's just ingrained in your body, in your mind, but when you see it, it just takes on a new meaning. When we're sitting at my dad's funeral, we sat on the front row. And I don't know about you, but when you go to a funeral, I couldn't tell you the first thing the pastor said. But I was thinking in my mind things that my dad and I had done together over the years. And I saw up on the screen his name. They had his picture up there. Most of the pictures were him and Jeffrey. He was close to my son. But it hit me because I saw my name, Marvin Medley. And I was over 50. I'd known it my whole life. We had the same name. I knew that. My elevator doesn't go all the way to the top, but most of the way. So I knew we had the same name, but it just hit me. These people are here for my dad, and here it is, I'm carrying on his name. So as I stand here today, I'm proud to carry on my dad's name. I'm also proud that I have a son who carries on our name. That's important to us. We all have taken a name, though, based on being here today. And that name is Christian. Follower of Christ. Today's message is, are we proud of that name? Do we live up to that name in our daily lives? Are you a Christian in name only? Before we get started, though, let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you again, just asking that you fill this place with the Holy Spirit. Father, as we talk today, as we open your word, I pray that you will reach out and touch each of us. Father, we're all at a different walk in our walk with you. You know where we are. Father, I pray that you will use me to the furtherance of your work, that someone will gain a blessing here today. So speak through me. These people didn't come here today to hear me. They came to hear you. And just use me, Father, to get the message that you have today out. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Before I get started, I want to mention the thought for today on the back of your bulletin. I don't know if somehow Pat got my notes, but this is perfect for the theme of today's message. It says, you may rise to the heights to which the Holy Spirit calls you. True religion means living the word in your practical life. Your profession is not of any value without the practical doing of the word. 10 years ago, I was unemployed. I got caught up in the '08, '09 recession, and probably I made too much money and I couldn't find a job. So I was living the high life, getting the unemployment check, $200 a week. And boy, you can really get rich on that. And my wife and son would go off and I'd have the house to myself all day. And I was sitting at the kitchen table and I was online looking for jobs. I was applying for my resume, and the doorbell rang. My dog started up a fuss. And so I went to see who it was, and it was Mitch Hayescamp. And some of you may remember him. He was the Trust Services Director for Georgia Cumberland. And an ex-pastor of mine was with him. And to make a long story short, 6 houses down from me, there was an Adventist in the neighborhood who had died. And he was a strange individual. I knew he was an Adventist, but he was just different. And he was cantankerous, and he was a grouchy man. I didn't really have much to do with him. But they said that he had willed his house to the conference. And they looked up, Adventists in the area, and they saw my name. And it just so happened I was unemployed, so they said, can you go down and we need his house painted a little bit. We need his grass cut. We need you to watch after the house. So I said, sure, I'm not doing much of anything else right now. So I went down, and I would be cutting the grass, and I would be working on the inside. Well, his neighbor across the street was someone that I knew because he was in the neighborhood. And he had twin boys, and we had taken them to church in the past. And Jeffrey was probably 2 or 3, 4 years older than them. So they said, your son is a good example for our son. And the guy came out of his house, had his beer in his hand, and he said, Greg, what are you doing over at that house? And I said, well, I'm working, I'm helping him, and I made a mistake. I said, this guy went to the same church as I did. He was the same denomination. The guy said, you guys went to the same church? And he's holding his beer. He said, I'm just an old drunk, but I know how to treat people better than that man. And you know how you say something and you say, boy, I wish I hadn't said that. And I'm thinking, how in the world do I ever make an impression now that they've created this link in their mind that we both go to the same church, and they don't think anything very highly of this individual. So I'm like, well, I wish I could have backed up on that a little bit, but it got me to thinking that each one of us meet different people in our lives. And do they know we're Adventists? Do they know we're even a Christian? And what kind of impression do we make on them? It makes it hard for another Adventist or another Christian to witness to them if they've already seen someone that's the opposite. A few years ago, the Dallas Morning News reported an elderly Dallas couple was having supper. They were sitting at home enjoying a delicious meal. They were watching TV, and there was a knock on the door. Fortunately, my knock on the door wasn't as bad as this knock, because Mrs. Davenport went to the front door, and it was a home invasion. He put a gun in her face and told her he was there to rob them. And Mr. Davenport, he told him to just stay seated at the kitchen table. He told Ms. Davenport to go and find money for them. And he was just going to take the money and leave. He wasn't going to harm them if they did what he said. As he was waiting, he saw the TV on. And he asked Mr. Davenport, "What are you watching?" And he said, "Well, we're watching the 700 Club." And he said, the burglar said, "Are y'all Christians?" Mr. Davenport nodded his head, "Yes." And the burglar said in all seriousness, "Me too." That criminal honestly believed that he was a Christian. However, he was deceived because his lifestyle and his character proved that he was not a Christian at all. Jesus once said in Matthew 7:16, "By their fruit you will recognize them." It's easy to say that we're Christians. It's easy to sit here today and say, "I'm an Adventist." But the truth is that our character, not our tongues, will reveal who we really are. Amen. As Christians, our character should be like Christ's character. Amen. We are to strive to be like Jesus. Whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did in 1 John 2:6. How is your character? Is your character like the character of Christ? The point in today's sermon is that our lives need to reflect the character of Christ. We are Christians, but do we aspire to imitate the characteristics of Jesus? We should not have to say we're Christians. It should be self-evident by the way we live. This morning we're going to examine, I just picked 5 characteristics of Christ that we need to demonstrate in our lives. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. We could be here until they had prayer meeting this afternoon talking about the attributes of Jesus. These are just 5 that I picked. The first attribute for those who proudly uphold the Christian name is obeying the 10 Commandments, just as Jesus did. Now you're thinking, "Well, that's okay. I got it licked. I'm here on the Sabbath day. I keep all 10. The second one says, and we did this in Sabbath school class here 3 or 4 weeks ago. We just went down through the commandments. And for those who weren't in here, we'll hit a few of those now. The second commandment says no graven images. Now, I'm sure none of us go home and bow down to something. But where do you spend your time? Does that TV grab your time? The third commandment, don't take the name of the Lord God in vain. Now, I know some of you are appalled. I would never do that. That's just beneath me. I would never say anything like that. Well, I'm glad we have Stephen here. Stephen thinks on a different level than most of us. Especially me. He's way deeper than I am. But when we were in Sabbath school 3 or 4 weeks ago, he made a comment that I picked up on that I didn't know if anybody in the class really heard, but it was profound. Stephen said, if you're not following God's commandments, you are taking the Christian name, the name of our Lord, in vain. That was profound. That was, thank you for making that comment, Stephen. The fourth commandment. Now, you're all here today on the Holy Sabbath day, but do you guard the edges of the Sabbath? If you are asked to work for a short time on Sabbath, would you oblige your boss? It's just a seminar. I just have to go get a contract signed. It won't be that long. Remember we studied in Sabbath school that your boss has no right to ask you to work on the Sabbath day. It's not his prerogative. It is, or her prerogative. Because that day is holy to God. We were at another church, and Jeffrey and another kid his age were the only really kids we had in the whole church. Well, the other boy liked to play football. So in the football season, he would play games on Friday night. And his guardian, his grandmother, said he just wants to play football. Football season is only so long. Well, whenever football season was over, there was basketball. And there were baseball. There was always something to do on Sabbath. And because that parent allowed that to happen on Sabbath, now they can never correct their son because he's seen that they've let him do it. Destroying the Sabbath day. Do you escape from the world on Sabbath? Or is your mind still on the things of the earth? The sixth commandment. Hopefully no one here considers murder. But do you harbor ill feelings towards someone that you haven't resolved? The ninth commandment. Bear false witness. In other words, are you totally honest on all your personal and business decisions? Now, I've worked with Adventists now for 13 years. I've worked for a company 5 years that was owned by an Adventist, and I've worked 8 years in my current job. Adventists can cut corners like nobody's business. And they're not rewarded for doing that because I watch people. And they never seem to get ahead. But I worked for a company that had an Adventist owner. And we would have trade shows. And they were on Sabbath, but they would be in Chattanooga. And the owner would go up there and work on Sabbath. And the field knew that I went to the same church as my boss. And they would call me on Monday and say, well, your boss worked on Saturday. I'm like, well, I can't answer for him. But from then on, it was hard to reach people because all they see is hypocrite. They see, well, you say one thing, but then you do something else. Now, when I was maybe 12, 15 years old, somewhere in there, my dad and I used to go watch them play softball. There was a field about a mile from our house. We lived in almost downtown Atlanta. And there was no parking at this facility. You had to park on the street, and you had to walk to this field. Well, my dad and I would go up there, and there were woods all around it. And when they would hit a ball in the woods, they wouldn't go look for it because they were scared in those woods. And so we would go there the next morning and pick the ball up. We didn't have to pay for softballs or baseballs. My dad showed me how to get those for free. But we're sitting on this telephone pole that was laid down, and we're watching the game. And this guy comes running in. He had his uniform on, and he jumped over the telephone pole where we're sitting, and he didn't want to leave money in his car. This big wad of money fell out right there. And he went running to his position. And my dad, at the time, he wasn't a Christian, but he was a good man. He said, "Hey, sir, you dropped this money." The guy turned around and he couldn't believe it. My dad handed him this wad of money. And I knew, because my dad and my mom put me through Adventist schools, that I knew the 10 Commandments. You're not supposed to steal. But I saw that in action. My dad gave the guy his money. And we weren't a rich family. We could have probably used that money. I'm sure my dad could. But he gave it back to him. And when you see that in action, it really hits home to you. How about you? If you're $5 short in the grocery store, do you raise a ruckus? If they give you $5 too much, do you say, well, it's their error, lucky me? How about your taxes? Do you find extra deductions in that time of year? About 5 years ago, our air conditioner was hit by lightning, and it fried the inside of it. I don't know how to fix that. And I said, well, I guess we'll have to pay to get somebody to fix it. Jeffrey at the time was teaching at Gwinnett Tech, and he knew the heating and the air guy in there, so he told him to come out, and he had a job on the side. Well, the guy came out and he was working on it. He was rebuilding it from the inside. He asked me if he could keep the motor because he wanted to show the students how it looks on the inside if you get struck by lightning. So I went out to him and I said, I'm about to go to the bank and get your money. How much are you going to charge me? Well, he said, how much is your deductible? And I said, $1,000. He said, well, it's going to cost you $1,600. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this contract up for $2,600. You pay me $1,600, and then this is free to you because your insurance company will cover the rest. I said, no, sir, I can't do that. Write it for $1,600, and my deductible's $1,000. I'll get $600 back. No big deal. Well, he looked at me like I was crazy. He's thinking, I'm trying to give you $1,000. So he either left thinking I was totally crazy, or maybe I made an impression on him. Maybe somewhere down the line he'll remember that. I don't know. But are you honest in all of your dealings? I skipped over the first commandment when I went through them. That's the hardest one for me. What do you put before God? God says to have no other gods before me. Now, each one of us has different gods in our life. But how do you look at God as compared to them? God also gives us a new commandment as well. In John 13:34, it says, I give you a new commandment that you love one another as I have loved you. Now, the second attribute for those who proudly uphold the Christian name is spending time with God in word and prayer. I looked up verses. Jesus was particularly attracted to mountains. In Matthew 14:23, it says, when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain to pray by himself. Matthew 26:36 says, then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. Now, Jesus was about to face execution the next day. When you're facing a big decision in your life, do you get down on your knees and pray about it? Or do you try to figure it out yourself? Jesus' example says, pray. In Mark 6:46, and he says, when he sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. And then Luke 6:12 is especially important. It says, now it came to pass in those days that he went to a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. All night. We get a little anxious when the prayer lasts 4 or 5 minutes up here, especially if you're kneeling. Turn with me, if you've ever been in my Sabbath school class, I bring this verse out a lot because it's the saddest verses in the Bible. But take a look at Matthew 7:21-23. Some of you may know it by heart. The Bible says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? Did I not get up at Auburn and preach in your name? Did I not lead a Sabbath school class? Was I not a deacon at Auburn? Was I not, you fill in the blank? Did I not cast out demons in your name and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Now, there's nothing in there that says these people are lawbreakers. It only says, Jesus says, I don't know who you are. Get away from me. I don't care what you did at that church. We don't have a relationship. So I'll give you a pop quiz. I hated those in school, but I'm going to give you one today. It's been 168 hours since we last met. How much time did you spend in the Word and prayer over the past week? How many hours did you spend on your smartphone or on your computer? How many hours did you spend watching TV? How many hours did you, whatever your fill in the blank is, how much time did you spend in the Word and how much time did you pray? That fill in the blank is different for each one of us. I've never understood how some Christians never spend any time with God. They never open their Word. They never study His Word. Yet they claim they want to go to heaven and live with Him forever. If you don't have time for Him now, why would you want to go live with Him forever? Did you hear that little prayer that the kid prayed up here? She talked about we can be with Jesus. If you don't have time to spend with Him now, why would you want to spend all the eternity with Him? You would be miserable up there. And God knows that. That's why He says, depart from me, for I never knew you. If the things of this world are more important to you or more attractive, then what would heaven do for you? The third attribute for those who proudly uphold the Christian name is being kind-hearted. As Christians, we should be kind-hearted just as Jesus is kind-hearted. In Mark 10, 13 through 16, we see the kindness of Jesus being bestowed upon the little children. People were bringing their little children to Jesus, and the disciples were saying, get away, get away. He has more important things to do. In this passage, several parents were bringing their children to Him, hoping that He would bless them. Now, we must remember that in that culture, the Jewish people believed that children should be seen, not heard. They were not the center of attention like they are today. The disciples thought Jesus had no time for the children. They scolded the parent, get him away. This man is too busy. Boy, were the disciples wrong. Jesus became displeased with the disciples' statement, and in firm and patient voice, Jesus said, let the little children come to me. You can imagine the little children rushed to the ground where Jesus sat. After several minutes of conversation, Jesus probably took the children one by one into His tender arms and pronounced blessings on them. From this story, we can see the kindness that radiated from Jesus. As disciples of Christ, we are to be kind to others. Ephesians 4:32 tells us, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, compassionate. To be kind means to be friendly and warm-hearted in nature. It's once said, the heart benevolent and kind is the heart that most resembles God. And if you want something to do this afternoon, look up the word benevolent. Its meaning is about this long. I don't want to bore you with all of those, but look up benevolent and see if that fits your life. Dan Clark, an author and an actor, songwriter, and recording artist, told a story about him and his dad. Years ago, they were at a fair, and they were standing in line, and one by one, they got closer and closer. Well, they noticed the man in front of them was holding his wife's hand, and they saw off to the side that there were 6 children. They weren't dressed fancifully, but they were clean. And they were standing there holding hands, waiting on their parents. And they were about to go into the circus, and this old man went up there and he says, I want 6 children tickets and 2 adult tickets. And, his wife is holding his hand, and she's looking up him like most wives do. And my husband is a knight in shining armor. He's taking us to the fair. And the woman told him how much it was, and he stood there. He realized he didn't have enough money. He said, how can I tell my kids they can't go to the fair today? Well, this gentleman's father was standing right behind him, and he could hear the conversation going on. He quietly reached into his pocket, and dropped a $20 bill on the ground and tapped the guy on the shoulder and said, sir, this must have fallen out of your pocket. The gentleman knew what was going on. He didn't ask for a handout, but he was so grateful that he would take the time to make sure that his family got in to see that fair, to that carnival. And the storyteller says, my dad and I didn't get to go to the fair that night, but we didn't do without, because they saw the joy that they provided on that gentleman's face. The story exemplifies the kindness that we are to have as Christians, the kind of kindness that reaches out to others with the love of Jesus. When we are kind to others, people can see Christ living in each one of us. The best portion of a good man's life is his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love. The 4th attribute of those who proudly uphold the Christian name is empathy. As Christians, we should be empathetic, just as Jesus is empathetic. We see this in John 11. We see the empathy of Jesus. We read that Lazarus, one of Jesus' closest friends, died. Now, when Jesus finally made it to town to see his deceased friend, he was met by Mary, Lazarus' sister. And in verse 33 it says, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And then it says Jesus wept. Why was Jesus crying? He was hurt and sad because his friend had passed away. Just as Jesus was empathetic, we need to be the same way. To be empathetic means to experience another person's feelings from that person's point of view. It's not sympathy. There's a difference. It's considering the feelings of others. It's putting yourself in another person's shoes. We are to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Now, Charlie was an art teacher, and he got a message that a former student was coming by to see him, a student that he had 5 years ago. And he remembered her as a quiet, plain girl who mostly kept to herself. Well, she told him a story that when she showed up, she was now a confident young woman, and she's now a mother. She had come to see her former art teacher, and she had an agenda. She said, you see, when I was in high school, my stepfather abused me. I couldn't take it anymore. My parents went out of town, and I had made the choice that I was going to go in the garage, start the car, and they would find me when they got back, but I would be free. I wouldn't have to live here anymore. But she went to school on Friday, to fulfill her duties, and then she was going to do that on the weekend. She made it to the 8th period class, which Charlie was a teacher. Charlie walked over and looked at her work. He sat down beside her for a moment, and he put his arm around her and said, "Good work. Keep up the good work." Well, she said, when I knew that you cared, I figured there were others just like you. She went home and destroyed the note that she had written, and she wrote another note. She called her minister, her pastor, and told him to come get her, and she never went back. But that kind word that that teacher gave her changed her life, because her life was about to end over the weekend. But she came back and told the teacher, "That little act of kindness that you showed me, it gave me hope." Now, we don't know what's going on in other people's lives, but when you meet them, you never know. Maybe they're thinking about the same thing. We need to treat them with empathy, and we need to love them, even though they might be unlovable. The 5th attribute for those who proudly uphold the Christian name is forgiveness. As Christians, we should show forgiveness towards others just as Jesus shows forgiveness towards us. Now, you all know the story in John 8, 1-9, and I'm running out of time, so I won't read that, but read it for yourselves. It's the story about the Pharisees and teachers of the law. They were trying to trick Jesus into making the final judgment call on the state of an adulterous woman. If Jesus told the religious leaders that the woman should be stoned, they would accuse him of violating Moses' law, which required death for adultery. On the other hand, if Jesus urged them to execute her, they would report him to the Romans, who did not permit the Jews to carry out executions. On the surface, it seems that Jesus was in a pickle. But of course, we know that Jesus knew the right answer. He told the people, "If any one of us is without sin, let him be the first one to throw a stone at her." Wow. And as you know, each person then went away one by one. Although everyone had left, Jesus was still faced with the problem of confronting the adulterous woman. Now, if you were the one who had to talk to that adulterous woman, how would you have handled that situation? "Lady, you're living in sin. How dare you cheat on your husband? You're a lowlife of the earth. You're going straight to hell and you deserve it." Would you have scolded her and lectured her? Let's look at how Jesus handled it. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. Jesus says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin." Although this woman stood for the opposite of everything Jesus taught, even though she was living a terrible and degrading sin that had degrading sin in her life, Jesus openly expressed tenderness and compassion and forgiveness to her. The Son of God didn't scold her. Instead, he lovingly told her to leave her life of sin. He gave her a second chance. He showed her grace. Do you show grace to others when they make a mistake against you, or do you harbor bitterness towards them? Who are we that we can harshly judge or scold another person for their sins or mistakes? We're just a sinner just like they are. Are we without sin ourselves? Are we righteous enough to throw the first stone? James 4:12 says, "There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor?" In Matthew 7:1-3, Jesus says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the big plank coming out of your own eye? If you look at the Beatitudes and you count them, there's 9 Beatitudes. Right in the middle, number 5, there's 4 before and there's 4 after. It tells you to forgive. The Beatitudes are based around forgiveness towards our fellow man. Galatians 6:1 says, "Brothers, if someone is caught in sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently." Of course, our natural tendency is to judge people and look down upon them. However, we are to be like Jesus, who shows grace to all sinners. Leonardo da Vinci painted the fresco The Last Supper in a church in Milan. A very interesting story is associated with this painting. At the time that Leonardo da Vinci painted The Last Supper, he had an enemy who was a fellow painter. Da Vinci had a bitter argument with this man, and he despised him. When Da Vinci painted the face of Judas Iscariot at the table with Jesus, he used the face of his enemy, so that would be present for ages. As the man who betrayed Jesus, he took delight in painting this picture, knowing that others would actually notice the face of his enemy in Judas. As he worked on the faces of the other disciples, he often tried to paint the face of Jesus, but he couldn't make any progress. Da Vinci felt frustrated and confused. In time, he realized he was wrong. His hatred for the other painter was holding him back from finishing the face of Jesus. Only after making peace with a fellow painter and repainting the face of Judas was he able to paint the face of Jesus and complete his masterpiece. No matter what people have done to us, we should be willing to forgive them and show them grace so that we can continue to create our masterpiece in life. We want forgiveness from God, yet sometimes we don't forgive others. I think the message today can be summed up with the words found in 1 John 3:18. "My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth." In other words, we shouldn't just profess to be Christians with our tongues, but we should show others by our actions and deeds that Jesus is number one in our lives. Amen. Yes. When we profess to be Christians with our tongues and our deeds and our actions don't back up our tongues, that's when we're labeled as hypocrites, a term that many Christians sadly earn. Now, the last verse of the day, turn with me with Psalms 119:59. Psalms 119:59 says, "I thought about my ways and turned my feet to your testimonies." Maybe you've heard something today that you need to change in your own life. Maybe you've heard something that says, well, I'm not totally living up to my Christian name. Now, there's 3 tenses of time. There's a past tense, there's the present tense, and there's the future. I'm convinced that God doesn't care a thing about what's in your past. He only cares about what you have in the present and what you have in the future. God doesn't care what you've been, how you've acted. But today, if you've seen something that you need to change in your life, change it. Take the Christian name and live it so that in the future you won't have to look back and make changes. As Christians, we should be kind-hearted. I'm sorry, I messed up there. As Christians, we should follow the 10 Commandments as Jesus did. As Christians, we should spend time with God just as Jesus did. As Christians, we should be kind-hearted just as Jesus was kind-hearted. As Christians, we should be empathetic just as Jesus is empathetic. As Christians, we should be forgiving just as Jesus is forgiving. Now, if you want to imitate Christ, to follow or endeavor to follow as a model or example, today's scripture, Matthew 5:16, says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Is Jesus glorified by your actions? When others interact with us, do we imitate the character of Jesus? Do we reflect Jesus' character? We claim to be Christians, but do we act the part of Christians, or are we just like the world? Is God glorified by our actions? Do your actions reflect the Christian name and character of Jesus? Do you uphold your Christian name? Let's stand for the final song. I think it's "Be Like Jesus." If you want that in your life today, sing that song when Kurt leads us.
Number 311. I would be like Jesus.
Heavenly Father, I pray that that is the prayer of each one of us, to be more like Jesus. Father, I pray now that you go with us throughout this next week and help us to show Jesus to those that we come in contact with. Help us to live our Christian name to the world. Be with us, keep us safe, and bring us back safely next week to worship you. It's my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.